coffee, get comfortable. We're about to get started. I'm excited to have this conversation with our guest today. You won't want to miss it. Unfortunately, we won't have time to catch every comment, so if there's something very important that you want seen, please consider using a super chat. As always, be respectful. We're glad you're here, and enjoy the show. Good morning, everybody. It's still morning. It's Saturday. Can you believe that it's Saturday morning and I'm here? Well, I have a guest. But before we introduce our guest today, I just want to take a moment here to say thank you for joining us. And today's guest is a special friend of mine, and he is going to be an avatar today due to a couple of reasons. One reason being his internet connection that he has. Also, I want to, again, stress the point that anybody coming on here can do it without being on camera if you so choose. Again, the most important piece of this is the stories that we need to share with other people to hit home that what we go through, no matter how mundane you may think it is, could be vitally important to somebody else in their journey, because it could be exactly the same thing that they're going through and it could help them move forward. So again, reach out to me anytime you want to be on here and we will make a special event. We will talk as long as you want. But without further ado, I want to introduce my good friend, Mr. Redshirt here. And we're going to talk today about his way of carnivore, his way of doing things, and how he got there. But good morning, Redshirt. How are you, my friend?
Good morning. I'm very well, thanks. Looking forward to this conversation, and I hope that this provides some value to the folks who I see coming together in the chat with my experience. Obviously, disclaimers out of the way early. I'm not a doctor, I'm not licensed in nutrition. This is my personal experience with research that I've done and dietary changes that I've made and the effects they've had. Um, I am going to be consulting with a physician. I've reached the point where I'm changing enough and I want to continue changing my diet further. So I'm going to need to be talking to one of my physicians about specifically about diet and about what this would do for me, whether it's a good idea, what things work, what things won't work. And that's up and coming. That's a conversation I haven't yet had. So, but it's looking it looks like a very interesting topic. I drive my family members nuts with articles that I find, passing them along, um, and it's pretty well established in the family that I've got these dietary changes going on, and it's going to continue. So. Uh, that's where I stand, and looking forward to having the conversation, explain all of that if I can in the time we have, and let's hopefully make it interesting.
We've got all the time it takes, Mr. Redshirt. So one thing, you are mentioning that you've done a lot of research
Yes.
and you are planning to discuss a lot of this with doctors. Now, my question would be, you're looking to probably have full blood panels done and all these things to see where things are. Now, with the research that you've done, I imagine that you've probably come across the fact that a lot of doctors and such do not necessarily approve of this type of way of eating, or even this type of, kind of doing your own research, trying to, doing the N=1 type thing. What would be kind of like plan of action if there's pushback in areas that you wouldn't expect, or pushback where you find that they're wanting you to kind of do something that is, it kind of goes against what you feel you should be doing?
At that point, you have to become your own patient advocate. You have to ask for reasons You ask for why do you recommend that or not recommend that? I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. Uh, don't attack the messenger. Obviously, you don't want to just say, "Well, you're obviously one of those disciples of the fat is bad for you camp, and I don't need to talk to you anymore." Um, you're basically entering into a negotiation about your health and your diet is the way I'm looking at it, and it has worked so far pretty well for me. Um, with the time I spent losing weight in the hospital, uh, there were a lot of decisions that had to be made because there were a lot of trade-offs that had to be made uh, in order to continue making progress. And I was on top of that every step of the way, which is a lot of work and requires that you not succumb to argument by authority. I'm the doctor here, so I decide. And there's a that's very common in the medical profession. They go to school for many, many years in order to develop expertise that they know you can't have on the level that they have it. And getting them to recognize that, yes, but this is the guy you're treating here. you need to you need to make me comfortable with what you want me to do. uh, is the way I tend to approach it, and it's worked for me in the past. Um, so it's basically just a matter of remaining firm, polite, and asking a ton of questions that lead in the direction you want to go.
Of course. And I think there's probably some, open and honest discussion that has to happen between, patient and doctor. Again, as you hit the nail on the head there with being your own patient's advocate, your own advocate for yourself. So, then you would say, if you want me to do this, how about we, like, they're, if depending on what your cholesterol comes back as, because they're still, as we know, harping on cholesterol where they probably shouldn't in a lot of cases. Depending on comorbidities and all these things that may pop up, they're probably going to want to put people on, they like to put people on statins, or they want to do metformin. They want to do all these different things. Um, so, I mean, then you have to kind of play a game and say, how about we do this? I would like to try this a little bit longer, because you also don't want them to mark you down as uncompliant,
Right.
even
Yep.
though one thing I like to reiterate to people is when a doctor provides a plan to a patient, no matter how closely the patient follows that plan, providing that they do actually do their best and follow the plan. If the results are not what the doctor expects with said plan, they will just write it up to the patient being non-compliant and not the plan being the problem.
Right. Yes, they will. And that's where you need to be giving feedback to the doctor. You need to be I mean, I just recently requested a specific test on one of my blood work panels because I had a question for the doctor that I wanted to discuss. So, knowing the more you know, the more you can convince the doctor that you know. And I have been, oh my goodness, I have been all down the primrose path of cholesterol drugs, what's a safe level of cholesterol, and so forth and so on. And it works a great deal in my favor, I find, to be able to show that back in the 80s, this is what the studies recommended. In the 90s, this is what they recommended. In the 2000s, this changed. Do LDL and HDL offset each other? The answer was no for a very long time. Now the answer is yes. Um, the overall level is something that is the biggest issue you have to get past. But I have been through that. I had been through that before with my doctors and said, I really don't want to take a statin for the following reasons. And they have discontinued them and said, okay, we'll monitor your blood work and we'll make sure that your cholesterol doesn't get any worse. I have very good very high good cholesterol and somewhat higher what's known as bad cholesterol. And so I've managed to finally sort of argue the medical establishment into let's take a wait and see approach with that particular case, with that particular issue that I face. So it is possible to do, um, and I have to do it across several disciplines. Some doctors want to get involved in that discussion, others don't. So you need to know which doctor to be talking to about it. But yeah, it's frustrating. It's very easy, and that's something that's counted on. It's very easy for you to say, okay, I'll take the statin. Well, the statin is a very lucrative drug for the pharmaceutical industry. They have a vested interest in it. Probably not the thing you want to point out to to your doctor first thing. Might be last
Right.
thing you want to argue whether the pharmaceutical company is making this available for their own purposes and not necessarily for my health. So that's a delicate balancing act that you have to tiptoe through. And obviously, you have a doctor's ego and professionalism that you're dealing with. So that's really where that's what I come up. It's where that's a good example of what I'm talking about because I have been down that road, and now I'm adding a new problem to for my doctor to solve, which is uh, getting rid of certain elements of my diet so that they don't adversely affect my digestion and my metabolism.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, when it comes to just a kind of like a little bit of a last touch on the cholesterol aspect, there are a couple of not well, one is now a doctor. They're like a super doctor. There's Nick Norwitz. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Nick
I'm
Norwitz. He's got his PhD and his MD both now, and he just got his MD from Harvard, and he's almost like to me like the real life Doogie Howser.
yep.
I mean, because I mean he's young and he's done all these things. He's been to Oxford and now Harvard, and he's on our side on a lot of this stuff. And he's a lean mass hyper responder, and and I'm not sure if you're familiar with what that means. But he's a person that when he eats like a carnivore or a heavy meat diet, cholesterol gets into the 500s, and doctors begin to melt down. But you're looking at like their CAC or their calcium scores, and they're coming up with zeros. So you're looking at does cholesterol truly does cholesterol when it's that high is that actually a significant indicator of cardiovascular issue? And they're starting to find out that it's not. And he's working with Dave Feldman, and Dave Feldman is works with Siobhan Huggins, and they're all working to unravel this cholesterol. I mean, they've got a book. I think it's called. I want to think they wrote the book Cholesterol Code. That might be. I might be mistaken on who wrote that book, but they do work heavily in the cholesterol side of things. Nick had a viral study that he did on himself, and N=1, where he did so many weeks of statins, and then he did a couple of weeks of Oreos, and Oreos beat statins like 2 or 3 to 1. Like he
Wow.
lowered his cholesterol with Oreos, and it's ridiculous. I mean, because I mean, just a high level of Nick, he came to this lifestyle because of like IBS, Crohn's, like ulcerative colitis type stuff. So he
Right.
was, you know, having explosive things in blood, and it's real bad. So he tried veganism, he tried all these things, and he came to keto and carnivore really was the only thing that actually helped him be able to live a semblance of a normal life. And so he's really on board with all of this. And then Dave also has a protocol. It's like it's actually like basically the Dave Feldman protocol with your cholesterol. If you know you're going to have a cholesterol test within so many days, he has a protocol you can do to get the numbers you want for your doctor.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, there's a lot of this stuff out there. So it's very interesting. But I want to kind of touch on, and I kind of want to kind of rewind the clock a little bit and kind of find out as much as you're comfortable with sharing how we got here and what was your overall motivation. You mentioned like a hospital stay. And so I kind of want to know a little bit more about you and share your story with the people watching today.
Absolutely. Without going into very specific terms, basically, Gary Taubes is a name that came up on my radar years and years and years ago, back when he was being laughed at uh, by the industry. And I was a skier. I was fairly active, but it was localized. It was time boxed during the year where I would get my exercise from skiing. And I always fought to maintain my weight during the summertime to keep myself from becoming out of shape in order for the following year's ski season. So what I got from him with his why we get fat and what to do about it. Didn't read that book, but I have seen him giving lectures uh, way back in the 80s, I believe it was, when I was in college and just after. And I started exercising, and the purpose of the exercise was to change my metabolism. Well, he gave me the key to understanding that when that craving for uh, waffles for breakfast and M&Ms or ice cream or cake or something for dessert started to subside and become have less of a grip on me, and things like eggs started to sound good for breakfast, to take it and run with it. And the idea being, okay, you've gotten the engine, the dual fuel engine, as he put it, uh, primed to start burning fat. Let's give it the fat, feed it the fuel that it's looking for, and cut back on the carbs and the sugars, and do that as much as you can. So I was never 100%. I would not have made it through the Atkins diet intro, probably, where you cut out all carbs and sugars for 2 weeks. But I was able to cut down on it all very substantially, get my weight back under control, and I'm talking about 30 pounds or so weight change over the summer, which would put me in good shape for skiing in the wintertime. And excuse me. So that was the way things went for a number of years. I had a couple of situations where I lost weight because I was unhappy with my current weight. But there came a point in my 50s, probably early 50s, where I put weight on and it wasn't coming off, and exercising didn't help. I could cut back on carbs and sugar and it wouldn't help. The weight was still there. I started eating less because I was less interested in food at that point, and it made me uncomfortable a lot of the time to eat. Started getting digestive issues and diarrhea. Not well, diarrhea of alternating between that and constipation. So basically, I knew my gut was completely out of whack. Yogurt didn't fix that. The gut biome wasn't easy enough to fix that some yogurt would solve the problem. This all culminated in a huge amount of weight gain about 6 months, 5 months ago, 4 months, 5 months ago. And I finally decided I had to have something. I had to talk to the doctor about it. This was not something I could do on my own with my diet. And that was when the doctor took one look at me and said, "I need you in the hospital because you're going to need IV uh, treatments for what amounts to edema. You have a huge amount of fluid buildup in your body." That had become obvious. It was inescapably obvious the last month or two. And so that's my hospital saga, was to go into the hospital and have an enormous amount of body water removed from the tissues of my body, my abdomen. Um, I lost 145 pounds in 3 weeks, just water weight. Um, I continued to lose weight at home until my weight hit a stable point, which it is not now about 185 pounds. Keep in mind that when I went into the hospital, I weighed 245 pounds. So no, I weighed 325 pounds. So I went from 325 to 180 and back up to 185. That's huge. In fact, that's dangerous. Um, there isn't a dietitian in the country that would tell you that that kind of weight loss in the space of a month is a good idea. But because it was water, the rules are a little different. The problem becomes one of maintaining electrolytes and your body's chemical balance while you're reducing the fluids in the body. So that all went as about as well as could be expected. That's the type of thing I was talking about with the negotiations in the hospital. Um, if I take more of a diuretic, I'll get rid of more water weight, but it's going to strip out this, this, and this. And they can't easily replace that with diet or even an IV supplement. So there were a lot of things going on, a whole lot of balls in the air at the same time in the hospital. I learned a few things about protein and diet. I didn't have enough protein in my diet. It turned out that I learned from my doctor that in the hospital that albumin, which you may have heard of, it's what essentially composes egg whites. Albumin is the protein that the veins in your body use to transport fluids and keep them where they belong, i.e., inside the vein. And it picks up fluid along the way and allows you to drain it through your renal system. That wasn't working for me. That had gone into reverse osmosis because of my total lack of protein in my diet and my near starvation diet by the end. So I was on IV uh, proteins, specifically, like basically egg whites dissolved into an IV bag, which I would get a half an hour of it at a time. Um, all of this finally got my circulatory system back where it belonged. And it's a case of putting things back together one piece at a time, and you have to do it in the right order because you have to be able to maintain all the other bodily functions. That's the big crisis that I went through. And basically, where I stand now is that with a stable weight, my goal is to maintain that stable weight and not not have the sorts of digestive issues that I had going into the hospital. Um, and to that end, I've started looking into and researching keto, carnivore, um, high fat, high protein diets, reducing other components in the diet. So it's basically been a journey of discovery. I've found out about seed oils. I've learned about, you know, replacements for sugar, uh, snack foods that work, even though you shouldn't need much, but just general eating habits. Um, eat when you're hungry because basically your body's telling you at that point you're not having a sugar crash. You really do need the protein and you need the meal. So uh, that's where I stand right now. It's a matter now of I've gotten to the place where I like the weight I am. I like the situation I find myself in terms of diet and health, mainly of health and digestive uh, my digestive tract, and that's basically what I want to maintain and improve. Keep it going.
Yeah, that's you touched on that is eat when you're hungry, finding satiety. And I think satiety is one of those points that you never really hear about when people talk about diets. I mean, I just put a video out last week. Yeah, this week, last week, I can't remember what it was. All about satiety and my struggles with satiety.
Yep.
And I imagine it's a lot of people's struggles with satiety. That's really going to be a driving factor in obesity, snacking. I mean, like people say, well, you don't need to snack. I mean, sometimes you want to snack. And I mean, that's perfectly fine. Um, but truly finding your body's ability to just be fine. And as myself, as somebody who has been, a food addicted person, binge eating person, when, I would eat myself almost to death every night. And it's not something you talk about. You don't talk about that with friends and family and such. I mean, those people who see it, whether they see it or they don't see it or whatever, but it's not a I mean, it's a struggle. It's a battle with your own body. And, you talk about Gary Taubes. He's an amazing person. And um I wish he would kind of he still, I don't think, gets the credit he deserves. Because like when I saw him on Joe Rogan, and he had the person that he had, because it was Gary and somebody else, I can't remember who it was. I always wanted to think it was Lane Norton, but it wasn't Lane Norton. I swear that it was Lane Norton. It's one of those things that how memory works. But it was Gary Taubes and somebody else on Joe Rogan, and they basically were not really giving Gary his ability to, to talk. And so I was very disappointed with that conversation. But, you know, I want to touch on, so at this point, you've been able to get the water weight down. Did
Yep.
they ever find out what the root cause of that water weight gain, outside of outside of that low protein issue?
Uh, yeah, that's a level of detail I'm not willing to go into
Okay.
in explicitly. Let's just say that I have a couple of systemic issues of which the water weight turned out to be exacerbated by or symptom of. Uh, I'm stabilized now, but I've got a lot of treatments now that I'm taking that I wasn't taking before uh, for those things, and those are rather critical. So it's more a matter of I'm looking to have the quality of life and looking to have the digestive ability to keep myself going, to give myself the energy. I mean, I'm walking for exercise. I've got a step monitor. Um, that 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 wiped me out. I'm the purpose of the diet really started out as I need protein to build muscle in order to get my legs back under me, so I can pick up a box of stuff. I can pick up a delivery at the gate, put it in the trunk of the car, so I can bring it back to the house. And one day got a bag of I got a bag of dog food. I think it was 40 pounds, and I went to take it out of the trunk of the car, and I almost collapsed. I looked like a weightlifter about to lose the deadlift competition by dropping the bar. And that's where this started. And essentially, there are other, as I said, there are other issues that are tangentially related that led to this. So the point here is let's get this stabilized, then we can go to work on the other things, and that's where it stands.
Now, walk us through, if you would like what's a daily like meal plan or a daily eating plan look like for you?
A daily meal plan these days would look like getting up and taking treatments, going back to sleep till noon, uh, because I'm a night owl. I have horrendous insomnia, so if I'm awake at 3 in the morning, it's no surprise. Um, at noon, I will start looking for something to eat. Uh, Generally, it's going to be eggs of one sort or another, uh, fried, scrambled, over easy, whatever, sunny side up. And I'll make myself about 3 eggs, and I'll have those with hopefully some minimal amount of bread and a maximum amount of breakfast meat. Ham steak or bacon or sausage or something like that. And that will settle me down for essentially the rest of the day. I eat about twice a day. I may have a snack just to chew on uh, in the middle of the day. That usually consists of a zero sugar beef jerky, um, sometimes a few nuts and pieces of fruit. Although I realize that I'm adding sugar to my diet with the fruit, the fructose is there. So I try to keep that to a minimum. And then dinner is usually going to be something that's fairly simply made from chicken, pork, beef more commonly, occasionally seafood, which we'll get into because that's one of the big holes in my diet uh, from where I live. And so, a couple of hamburgers, no bun, cheese on top, season it right. We just had a eye round of roast, eye round roast last night for dinner, which was excellent. Although, if albeit being given the cut of meat, not the most tender. Um, so I shaved that as best I could for later, and that's basically the type of thing we'd have. We just basically had that with uh, the gravy that came with it, and some green beans. And I said, well, this naturally lives on mashed potatoes. So next time we need to make mashed potatoes to go with this.
Now, if you were looking for a mashed potato replacement, my friend Chris, he has a channel, Chris Cook in Nashville. You may or may not be familiar with him. And he has a carnivore mashed potato
Mm-hmm.
that is ridiculous. Like, I was at his house last year and he whipped it up for me. We were in his kitchen and he whipped it up for me, and it's stellar. And it's not too overly complicated. I still haven't made it myself. I feel so bad because I was going to make it this year for the holidays. I actually still have most of the stuff in the fridge to make it. I mean, it's if just by memory, it's egg whites, so lots and lots and lots of egg whites, like a whole carton, like a 32-ounce carton of egg whites. Um, some toasted gelatin, some toasted beef gelatin, some mozzarella, like fresh mozzarella cheese, and I want to say there's probably some heavy cream in there, maybe some cream cheese. Like if I'm trying to remember correctly, all the you can find that out. He has a website that you can go and you get the full rundown of the recipe. He has two versions. One is a long-winded version, like a lot more in depth, and then there's an easier one, like the 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that Evelyn, one of my mods, can put the link into his video in the chat for me. That would be awesome. Um, but I mean, it's got the texture, it's got the flavor, it's uncanny what that man can do in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Because that same day he had made carnivore. I can't remember. I think they were carnivore like Ritz crackers, and there was like a buttery flavor. And now I'll give you his recipes can be very very in depth and
Yep.
can take a long time. So, I mean, depending on what your level of the kitchen skills, or even comes to me the desire to spend that much time in the kitchen, that's a whole other ball game. But I feel like his mashed potatoes, I know a lot of people make them quite often,
Yep.
and so I mean that's something you're really missing, and you do want to keep your carbs as low as possible. That's a definite avenue to explore. And I mean, he's got killer recipes, and he's just a super sweet guy too. Um, but yeah, um, I wanted to touch because I was thinking, and maybe I just misinterpreted what you had said, but I wanted to say, like, because when we were discussing you being here with me today, you were
Yep.
saying something about there was and maybe you were just talking about carnivore in general, but I was thinking that maybe there was some sort of protein that you couldn't digest, or you having digestive issues with certain types of protein. But this seems like you were talking with the full gamut with chicken, beef, pork. So it doesn't sound like that's the case, but I was just wanted to double check with you and see.
Well, I had problems with beef. I had problems with digesting beef and beef fat for a very long time. I had gallstones when I was a kid, and wound up losing my gallbladder in my 20s. So it's a little bit challenging for me to eat beef now because of the lack of a gallbladder. Um, my body's adapted in large part, but it sometimes is an issue. It hasn't been as much recently because I think my body's metabolism has decided to jump on that food, and it doesn't sit around and become a problem for me in the digestive system. Uh, but that's I mean the unavailability is mostly organ meats and things, and that's personal preference more than an inability to digest. Um, so obviously there's some vitamin issues that have to be I'd have to address because you know it's basically the vitamin A's, the vitamin B's, types of things you get out of liver and so on, are very helpful because they're in concentrated form. You don't need a lot, whereas you need quite a lot of something of just a generic beef or fish for it to make a huge difference. And fish is an issue which we can talk about. Seafood is a I I've lived for the first time in my life more than 50 years from the ocean here in central Texas. So seafood is a completely different uh, supply chain here than it is if you're sitting in New England on the coast, like in eastern Massachusetts where I used to live. Um, so you've got a lot fewer options, and you have to be a lot more creative to be using seafood in your diet.
I understand the seafood issue. I mean, we like we like ahi tuna, we like, fresh salmon. We love seafood, and we live in central Indiana,
Hmm.
a lot even farther away from the ocean.
Yes.
But that's like also kind of one of the downsides. Like even when we like to vacation in Alabama down on the shore, and I still feel like even down there, like the seafood is still not what you would expect to be. That like you're on the ocean, the Gulf or whatever you want to call it, but you feel like it should be better. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it's a matter of cultures. It's a matter of food cultures. Obviously, one of my favorite cookbooks is Louisiana Real and Rustic by Emeril Lagasse, Chef Lagasse. Um, it has plenty of seafood in it. It is Cajun style and Creole style. That's a culinary tradition that involves a lot of freshwater and saltwater. Uh, shellfish and fish and you name it. There's crappies, there's redfish, there's the crawdads, crabs. So there's a ton of variety there, and what you make of it, it's what's made of it locally is what you get from that sort of a culinary tradition. Um, I'm with you on going someplace and finding out there isn't a whole lot there. Um, I fell in love with salmon in the Pacific Northwest, but I also fell in love with fried calamari. And fried calamari is
oh,
fried in a seed oil, and it kills me now. It absolutely kills me to order calamari because I can feel it. It bothers me. The seed oil that it's fried in is a problem. But the salmon that you get, where you've got wild caught Alaskan salmon rather than farm raised Atlantic salmon, is a world of difference.
oh.
And farm raised Atlantic salmon is on my no go list for things I will not eat these days. Um,
I mean, yeah. I mean, we eat it because really, I mean, we don't have a lot of choice.
right.
But I mean, especially when it comes to cost. But we love calamari, and weirdly enough, I think some of the best calamari that Shander and I have ever had. was at a restaurant in Las Vegas called Carmine's. It's
Mm-hmm.
in the forum shops of one of the big properties there, but I mean, it was melt in your mouth amazing because most of the time it's rubbery when you're getting it fried. You know, when you're getting it at a restaurant, you want it. It's on the menu. You're like, oh man, this is gonna be so good, and it's all rubbery. But this stuff was melt in your mouth, delicious. Yes, fried in seed oils, but at least that's something we can touch on as well. Your sensitivity to seed oils, and thankfully we're in a situation right now, at least that we are starting to see kind of a receding popularity of seed oils. People are starting to want to use tallow. They're wanting to use lard. They're wanting to use more animal fats, more stable fats.
Yep.
Um, there are there are apps out there like seed. I think I want to say it's called Seed Oil Out. There's an app where you can look at restaurants near you that aren't using seed oils. Um, one of the places, like, we don't go out to eat very often, but one of the places we do go is Buffalo Wild Wings because they have two separate fryers. Now, how diligent they are with these fryers is a whole other story, and maybe the quality of the lard in one of the tallow in one of their fryers is another piece or contention. But they fry their traditional wings in beef tallow,
Mm-hmm.
and they fry everything else in seed oils because, again, that's industry standard across the board. I mean, that's been the industry standard since the 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So I am glad that we are starting to see that shift and that awakening almost of the seed oils, what they do to us, and that now it's, places like Costco are carrying various brands of tallow and such, and you can, like, instead of a TV on Black Friday or Cyber Monday, I'm ordering, beef tallow off of Amazon.
Yep.
So, I'm getting a deep discount on some Chicago Packers, Wagyu beef tallow, which isn't really Wagyu, probably not, but it's a good quality beef tallow. It's better than you could find in the store.
Yep.
So, I mean, so what's your experience with that thus far?
My experience with that thus far is that I'm making a lot more at home. Um, it's of necessity. I do have the Chicago Packers tallow, which I bought from Amazon, as you exactly as you just said. Um, I use avocado oil if I'm cooking usually Chinese food. I replace the peanut oil with avocado oil. Um, I've always liked to make Chinese food and have started making more of it, trying to make more of it. I'm starting on dumplings and dim sum because dumplings and dim sum are heaven. There is, I mean, that's those are those are absolutely as exquisite as anything produced by a master sushi chef in Japan. Um, and they're very thin wrappers usually, so you're not adding much in the way of carbs. It's basically just a steaming package for the meat and mince and shrimp or whatever it is that you're eating. Um, but yeah, it's always been a challenge. There's I mean, we make homemade. If we have a salad, we have homemade salad dressing because we're not going to use the canola oil to make it with. We use olive oil. Um, and it's but they here in Texas, in Central Texas, Southern cooking is the rage, and steakhouses and Southern cooking. So restaurants are absolutely horrendous as far as diet goes, as far as quality of ingredients in terms of just the oils and the things that are used, and that's just because it's cheaper. I
I
mean, it's
mean,
cheaper.
Southern cuisine is inherently poverty food.
It is. It
Yeah.
is inherently poverty food, and it's you're using the greens of all of the vegetables where you're having collards. You're having collard greens. So essentially, it isn't necessarily an ideal diet on a good day. Um, Cornbread and fried fish. I mean, fried catfish. I remember from fish fries as a kid. Uh, the big ones that I learned from Southern cooking that I took away from that were the roasts were good. Um, Essentially, the crabs were amazing. My grandfather taught me how to trap and catch crabs in off of his just off of the riprap on his in his waterfront property, using the chicken wire cages. And believe me, it gets your full and undivided attention the first time a large blue claw crab gets out on the grass and gets the claws up and starts sidling towards the water. How do you deal with this thing? It's all pointy bits. you know. So I learned how to safely pick up a crab. I knew as instinctively as a 6-year old what a pot full of crabs would do. The one tries to get out, the others all drag it back down. That's a metaphor people use for bad social situations. Um, I know firsthand as a child what that looks like. Um, so it's
That's not disturbing imagery at all, but
not at all.
but
Yeah,
also delicious.
I had a depraved childhood. um, but yes, it's we'd have a fish fry, and I got spoiled as a kid because I was 10. I remember the date because I remember the trip I was on in Miami. I was 10 years old the first time I had fish that I hadn't caught that day. I mean, that to me is a fresh fish.
Oh,
Is it's come out of the water and it's been cooked within 24 hours of being caught. And the only place I know of where you can get fish like that is not even in sushi, although your sashimi and sushi come close. There are Chinese restaurants, certainly were in Chinatown in Boston, where you would point to a large fish tank and there'd be a farm raised largemouth bass in the tank. And the waiter would go over with a dip net and pull that fish out of the tank and take it back to the kitchen. And that was your steamed fish for lunch. And that's that was alive when it hit the table in the kitchen. So, that's a level of freshness that you don't get very often. And
we don't even
but
get you don't get that here. I mean, we had a seafood restaurant here in Indy in downtown Indianapolis for a while. I don't think it's there anymore. Rightfully so. I mean, I think it was too expensive to be here. It was called the Ocean Air, and
mhm,
they were cooking today what got flown in yesterday.
yep.
So they were flying in fresh fish, and that's what that was going to be on the menu today. And I'm like, I never got to go. I knew it was there, but I never got to go.
Yeah, I went to a seafood place in North Austin a while back, and the waiter very proudly informed us that their fish all came direct by air from Foley Fish in Boston, Massachusetts. And I said, "Oh, I'm familiar with Foley Fish. They used to run the fish counters in the supermarket where I shopped." And you should have seen the look on his face when it was like, we struggle to afford to buy this stuff, and you're telling me you buy it in Massachusetts in the supermarket at the fish counter. Yes, we did.
It's a lot cheaper. You don't have to fly it somewhere.
Right. And I mean, Foley's famous in the Boston area. You don't have to go to Austin, Texas to find out how good their seafood is. They not only provide all the fish to a supermarket fish counter, they provide the employees. So all of the fish comes in whole. And those guys behind the counter spend the first part of their day doing nothing but cutting fillets, skinning, scaling, cutting fillets, cutting steaks. And when you go there and you buy, uh, they have two of the three grades of sea scallops. The best is fresh scallops, no water. Those are about $21 a pound last I checked it, even there without flying them anywhere. Um, we used to get frozen sea scallops that were individually flash frozen in Alaska. They literally walk into uh, a cold, a refrigerator in the hold, a freezer in the hold of the boat that is at 20 below zero. And they take a tray of scallops and they put them into a rack like they're baking cupcakes. And by the time the guy makes it out the door and gets his mittens and his hat off, those things are already half frozen. Those were phenomenal. Same with shrimp, and of course we had all the fresh fish we could deal with at Foley. And they would do requests. You could ask them for a specific fish, and they would call you the day before and say it's on the truck tomorrow. When do you want to pick it up, and how do you want it cut?
Oh,
So you could get a halibut for a family dinner, and get a halibut, half of a halibut staked out, and the rest of it staked out and put into freezer bags and put into your freezer like you're buying volume beef. Um, so that's an example of what one man's food staple at the supermarket is another man's specialty item flown in direct from Boston at a restaurant.
right.
You know, and that you have to take that into account because there's no sense in crying over I can't get that here. You have to find a way to make do with what you can get where you are. And we do that all the time. I mean, I've been doing that all of my life pretty much with seafood. I will pay somebody else to pick crab for me, quite frankly, because I cannot be bothered. You're hungrier when you're done picking crabs than you were when you started. So,
Yeah.
makes a very nice appetizer. It's absolutely useless as fuel.
One
um,
thing that I did want to I want to touch on is you mentioned that you're eating more organs and such now, and that's something that we as humans have over the last couple hundred years have really backed away from, where we
mhm.
would eat at the point in human history we would probably primarily eat only organs with some muscle meat thrown in, and now we are more likely, we're more muscle meat and then give the organ meat to dog food,
Yeah.
things like that.
Well, it's actually
So,
that's one of the things
you
I
know,
don't eat. That's one of the
talk a
things
little
that
bit
I
about that and
sure. Uh, I think I miscommunicated it. I tend not to eat organ meat.
okay.
I have plenty of Chinese recipes that will let me make kidneys, spicy kidneys, chicken livers, goose livers. Um, I tend not to eat those by choice. The uh, the liver pates were something we used to treat ourselves to go on a um, what you call like basically a meat and cheese cold board, um, which in Norwegian is easy to remember. It's kortboard, charcuterie. Um, Basically, we would add it to a charcuterie. We'd have that and sardines and crackers and French bread and Westphalian brown bread, the German stuff that it's made out of rye and doesn't have any wheat flour in it at all, which means it's crumbly. Um, but it weighs a ton. If you drop a 6 slice loaf of that on your foot, you'll break your foot. Uh, we tended to we'd get it in the pate. Would probably be the place we get it the most. And Mrs. Redshirt has made a couple of country pates, which went over like the proverbial lead balloon here at a holiday dinner gathering for the family. That was famously unpopular. um, but what I try to do is, as much as we can, Uh, we'll, I eat, whole sardines, uh, with the guts, with the bones and the whole thing. But no, liver is one of those things that I've never been able to stop comparing to the oil filter on a '57 Chevy. And it started when I found out what the tamale was in a lobster in New England. That's the green stuff in the inside of a lobster's body, just above the tail, and or in the thorax. And if you know what a lobster eats for dinner, you do not want to eat the liver that filtered that bloodstream. You just don't. So I never really got into the organ meat stuff because the first thing you do when you clean a fish, what's the first thing you do? You throw the guts away. You
Yeah.
slice the fish open, you chuck the guts out, you take the giblets out, and if you do anything with them, you make gravy out of chicken or turkey giblets. So, and my father loved beef liver and onions. Ugh. And I can't. There are certain things I cannot stand the smell of cooking in a house. That's one of them. Another one is Manhattan clam chowder, and the third is scungili. I used to have to run for the beach when I visited my grandparents on Long Island in the summertime, and we'd go clamming. We'd bring the conchs back to Mrs. Apicello 2 doors down, and she'd make squingili out of it. And my grandmother always turned all of her clams into Manhattan clam chowder, which is basically clam and tomato juice for a broth. And for some reason, the smell of the clams cooking and the smell of the squingili cooking was just beyond my ability to handle it. And I would hold my breath as I ran back past both houses on my way to the beach to spend the rest of the afternoon down there scrounging for mussels for dinner for an appetizer. Um, it's just a matter of personal preference. There's certain childhood associations I have. Uh, Meatloaf is one of them, just because I've never had a good one. Never had a good meatloaf. Don't want to try now. I'm too old, too set in my ways. Keep your meatloaf. Thank you very much. Give me a roast beef sandwich, and I'm just as happy. Or a hamburger, or a Salisbury steak. So it's just do I manage it all in ideal terms? No, and I doubt that I ever will. My diet's going to wind up being a compromise even before my doctor gets a hold of it. So I recognize that there are a lot of vitamins and a lot of fats and a lot of things in organ meats that are very good for you in terms of your diet. I just can't get past textures in many cases, textures and flavors. As I say about liver, there's nothing that a different texture and a different flavor wouldn't fix on that particular dish.
There
Um,
are a lot of people that will take beef liver, calf liver, and grind it up and mix it in like 10% in with their hamburger and such.
mhm.
I hear a lot about that. Sherry had a question. Well, I don't know. It's not necessarily a question, but she says that her ex is from Massachusetts. She doesn't eat fish, and she's allergic, but he did, and all of his friends. And we brought back 2 coolers full of live lobsters one time on a trip, as the price was so reasonable there.
Oh, it
And
is.
talking about how she had to leave the table while they were eating the green stuff.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah, don't eat the tamale. Go ahead and eat the coral. That's the red stuff. That's basically lobster caviar. But no, I don't tend to get much into the body of a lobster. It's the claws, the knuckles, the legs, the tail. Um, my father was allergic to shellfish, which killed him. I mean, it just absolutely he couldn't stand it. Having grew up, I mean, he grew up on Long Island, spending summers there. And all of his doctors finally threw up their hands and said, as far as we can tell, shrimp sends you into anaphylactic shock. So we're just going to ban you from having all shellfish. You're allowed fish, but no shellfish. And He had a number of episodes over the years that got worse and worse, and that finally reached the point where they were like, "There's only one solution. We're just going to have to stop. You just have to stop eating these things." And allergies are a huge deal as far as maintaining a balanced diet, because you can be allergic. You can be allergic to things like you can be lactose intolerant to the point where you can't drink milk and you have to have a substitute for the half of the dairy or most of the dairy. Um, Gluten intolerance, uh, when it's not fashion, it's a real it's a real intolerance. Uh, Seems like everybody wants low gluten these days, but it's celiac disease that
Yeah.
requires it.
Well, I
So,
think, there's a lot of talk that celiac disease isn't necessarily what we think it is. And,
mhm,
not to say, that grains and all this thing are really not all that healthy for us anyway, but people say that with celiac disease, they can't eat bread here in the States.
right,
But they've had bread in other countries and it doesn't impact them at all.
right,
So, I mean, it could be the glyphosate, it could be, the way that it's been monocropped. All the wheat that we have has been monocropped to death. The way that it's been modified to be so much taller than it ever was supposed to be. All the things, right? And but it could be. I mean, there's glyphosate on all of it. So I mean, is gluten? But I mean, but then that begs the question though: is glyphosate on other things that are in gluten-free products, and does that impact people? So that's another question, another thing to look at as well.
yep. And it's not necessarily. I mean, one of the things I look for in bread flour or baking flour is protein content. And I don't know if you ever watched Clarkson's Farm. Um, Fantastic show, very funny, and essentially Jeremy is the everyman idiot who's learning about farming while everybody else actually does it for him. And I remember from his very first episode, he took a sample of the wheat that they'd grown, which was supposed to be for pasta and bread, but they needed a certain content to the wheat for it to be classified as fit for human consumption in those cases. And if it didn't make that protein level, it was going to be reclassified as animal feed and fed to livestock. It wasn't a gluten test, and they took the flour in. They had a sort of little side bet going on with Charlie. He did with Charlie, who was his land manager, and it came back at about 13 or 14, 12.5 to 13% protein. Well, if you look in the nutritional information of breads in the United States that are made in the United States out of flour that's produced here, you're going to find 6 to 8% protein, which in England is classified as animal feed. Um, 12% protein is considered a high gluten, high protein, elastic wheat used for making Neapolitan pizza crusts and dough for calzones. So I have about 11 pounds of that stuff sitting on my counter right now, along with just basically straight, pure, uh, all-purpose flour, which I'll use for dumpling making. And I'm looking forward to impressing our mutual friend Nick Weiser, who popped in the chat earlier with a Neapolitan pizza that I send him a picture of. He goes, "Would this be enough to convince you to come down to Central Texas into the middle of nowhere?" Because we do have one restaurant in town that would give me easily gives me a run for my money on being able to make a pizza like that. They're a Neapolitan pizza restaurant, and I've met the owner of the place, and he's an absolute fanatic chef owner, trained in Italy. And we actually asked him once for a couple of his, if we could buy a couple of his rested pizza doughs. and we got the stink eye from him. And he said, "Well, how do you plan on preparing a pizza with this?" I said, "Well, the first thing is we're going to put the pizza stone in the oven and turn it to 500 and leave it at 500 degrees throughout the process. It'll be at least an hour before we put a pizza on it. And then we're going to flatten the thing out and we're going to press it out with our fingers to get it with flour and underneath it. And and that was about the point where he stopped me. He says, "Here, you can have two of them. You know, obviously know what you're doing." So he gave us two pizza rounds for individual pizzas, and they were phenomenal. Um, they were just a lesson in when you have the right ingredients, uh, especially for Northern Italian food. I love Northern Italian food because it's all about the ingredients, the handling of, the freshness of, and you know, balance your flavors. And that gives us salads like the caprese salad, which is basically nothing more than a big slab of mozzarella, a one or two fresh leaves of basil, sweet basil, and a slice of tomato. And
Yeah.
and I consider balsamic vinegar to be gilding a lily on that. Just give me some olive oil on it and sprinkle it lightly with some finishing salt and grind a few grinds of black pepper. I have my salad. I'm all set. You guys can eat it whatever you want. I'm eating half of this tomato right here.
And that's what Chandra likes. She likes that caprese salad. But we do got to give a shout out to Nick for the $5 super chat. We appreciate him very much.
Yes. Yeah.
He's an okay guy, I guess.
He-
I've
he's
known him for a very long time.
Yeah. I've known Nick. I've known Nick Weiser since my earliest days on YouTube, about going on 6 years ago. He never left. you,
Good.
you lurker. but but yeah, it's the restaurants. You can still find restaurants that do good food, obviously. Um, and I love the renaissance that we're seeing with fryer oils and tallow. With fried chicken places starting to go back to tallow, and I call it a renaissance because it is a return to, it's a rediscovery
Mm-hmm.
um, of the fact that tallow is a great high temperature frying oil, and lard and clarified butter. Clarified butter is beats the living daylights out of adding olive oil to butter in a saute pan to saute something, because you're going to oxidize the olive oil. I don't care. I don't care how they press the olive oil. It's going to get oxidized by the heat in that pan. You're better off just going ahead and using clarified butter in the pan and make it with that. And learned my lesson from short order fry cooks when I cooked at a cafeteria um, one summer. Uh, you cook your toast and your English muffins in clarified butter on top of the griddle. So you're not
Now
putting them.
I do wish that this renaissance of seed oils, or the renaissance of animal fats, I wish it wasn't a political issue,
Yeah,
because
yes,
that's one thing that I try to avoid on this channel is politics. But unfortunately, seed oil, the seed oils out, beef tallow and things become a political partisan issue, and it's frustrating to me
yep.
because our health shouldn't be a partisan, it shouldn't be a political issue. And I understand, fortunately, are very politicized and on our opposite sides of the political aisle, which is crazy to me that
Yeah,
we would, yeah.
I agree. Um, it makes no sense to me that just because a new set of guidelines have come out. The wrong person's in charge, so the guidelines must be bad, and I'm not going to pay attention to them. I'm going to claim they're a political conspiracy.
Now, am I completely happy with the new guidelines? Of course not.
No.
But they are a small step in the right direction. One of the things that I have a video that I've made on this that I haven't edited or released, but because I kind of feel like I missed the opportunity. I mean, I'll probably still put it out, but I kind of missed the hype on it. But my problem with the guidelines is the fact that while they are pushing a protein heavy, meat heavy diet, they have set the saturated fat guidelines so low that it makes eating primary meat or having a meat heavy diet basically impossible. So where they're saying you need to be eating more red meat, you need to be eating more chicken and all these things, but they've set the calorie, and calories is a whole other thing that I think is total BS, but they've set the calories from saturated fat to overall 10% of your daily intake. So you're looking at maybe 200 calories of saturated fat in a day, which leaves you almost no red meat. So it's like they're giving completely mixed signals, saying yes, please eat more red meat, please eat a more protein heavy diet, but don't at the same time almost. And that's super frustrating for me because a lot of people aren't going to look at that nuance. Some people are going to say, yeah, we're supposed to eat all this meat. And then there's also going to be the other side of the people saying, yeah, but they're still keeping, and there's people out there who think that the saturated fat recommendation, even at 10%, is too high.
Yes.
Because saturated fat, cholesterol, all these things, because people have, that whole, the Ansel Keys idea that, the heart health hypothesis and all the stuff that goes into that from the 1940s with Procter and Gamble and American Heart Association, or the American Heart Association, and all these things. And it's to me, I mean, yeah, it's a step in the right direction.
Yep.
But I mean, people are so angry. They're thinking, and I've seen so many, people come out and, against this. It's dangerous. And I'm curious to see, as politicized as this is, if or when there is an administration change, will they go back before? Because these guidelines are supposed to be good through 2030.
Right.
Will they go in early if an administration changes in the next election cycle? Will they go in and change it early? Can they change it early? And will they wind the clock back? And will that impact, the renaissance that we're having with against seed oils? How will that impact the mainstream? And one thing that I had because I'm in a proper human diet health coach course right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, because it's run and it's run by Dr. Barry. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with him or not.
No, I'm not.
But he is one of the big pushers of what he coined the phrase proper human diet. So that's a spectrum from, low carb, keto, carnivore, lion diet. All these things fall in line with a proper human diet, right? Keep your carbs as low as you possibly can. Animal meats, animal fats, that kind of stuff, right? So basically, we were having a class with him, and he was saying that the benefit to being a health coach over a health practitioner, because as a health coach, you're still not a health, what would be a healthcare professional. You're still not a doctor, nurse, or even a dietitian, because that's a whole other thing. But as a health coach, you can still leverage and utilize the guidelines and say, see, this is what they want. They want you to eat more meat, but it's still understanding the nuance That's still one of those things you still have to look at a little bit. But, Biscuit's right. Carnivore diet's between 26 and 32% from saturated fats. So it's really, they've kind of put you in a rock and a hard place with the new guidelines, keeping it under 10%. So, yeah, I mean, a long story short there, like, I'm just curious to see what the future holds here. Can we make big enough difference between now and when, when obviously the pendulums will swing the other way eventually, that's history shows us it's going to do that. Um, will we learn enough? Will we gain enough information? Will we get enough stories out? Myself and with my channel and all the other channels out there doing these kinds of conversations, talking about regaining our health, taking control, and doing what's right for us as individuals. And obviously we have to understand the risks associated with that. But can we learn enough between now and when the guidelines inevitably change, whether they're changed drastically back or maybe even move forward? We don't know. But
Right.
can we continue doing these talks by having people like you on, Red Shirt, and all the other people that I have on, and the other channels that are doing this, whether it's Dr. Barry, Nisha, all the people out there, like, there's people out there pushing like Dave Feldman and Nick Norwitz, and the more sciency people, the more then you have people like Dr. Sean Baker, who has a reach and has been on Rogan twice, and somebody who is living a carnivore diet for over 10 years. Are these things, are they going to make a big enough impact that we are going to continue to see a shift, or will it all kind of crumble in the next 10 years? I don't know.
Well, it's a matter. It's a matter. Well, one, the fear, probably the biggest fear I share with you on politicizing this is that it becomes that tied to that pendulum, and that guarantees it'll swing back. And Nick makes a very good point in the chat that I've made in Twitter. Um, People are obsessed with convenience. That's absolutely true. And the guidelines are essentially, whole foods that are going to require a certain amount of effort, experience, knowledge in order to make it work, to make a meal out of the components that you're given by the guidelines. Um, I do that all the time with Chinese food. You break the food down into edible portions so you can eat it with a chopstick in a bowl of rice, and then you build up a meal out of that. And it's basically comes under the umbrella term of prep, and I'm terrible at it. I add an hour to the prep time of just about every recipe that I work with, if it involves the use of a knife, because I've tried to cut my fingers off twice. So I'm very slow prepping vegetables and prepping meat with a knife. Um, and just little tricks that you can learn that make life a lot easier that people don't always realize. If you get a flank steak and you want to make Chinese food out of it, it's very simple. Put it in the freezer until it is the consistency of a snow cone, where it's icy, but it's still compressible. And then take that thing and as fast as you can on a cutting board on the counter, slice it diagonally against the grain, and you wind up with the most perfect, tiny little name tag size slices of beef that you can then throw into a marinade and put into a dish. And all it takes is a little bit of work in the time spent in the freezer, and it's a totally different problem to solve, to cut that up for a meal. If you're being told you need 1/8 by ½ inch by 2 inch slices, and most people would take one look at that in a restaurant recipe and go, "You've got to be kidding me," So it's a matter of, there are some tricks, and the biggest mouthpiece that we could have talking about these things, besides folks like you having conversations about doctors' recommendations and the guidelines and so forth, is just a straight cooking YouTube channel. My wife loves them. Mrs. Redshirt, absolutely. It's the one thing that both of us will sit down and watch together is somebody's making something we like and we want to try and make ourselves at home. Let's see how this person does it.
Yeah, so
Uh,
you need to watch Chris Cook in Nashville for sure. He's got
okay.
loads of awesome, and he breaks it down with some of the sciencey, like why he's doing what he does, why he's using certain ingredients that he's using, how they impact each other. So, I mean, he really goes into depth and he puts a lot of work into the editing of his videos. And so I think you two would probably really like that. Now,
Chris Cook.
Chris Cooking Nashville.
Chris Cooking Nashville. Okay, I'm
Yes.
going to write that down. Yes, we do, and the thing of it, the thing is, a lot of the very few of these channels have anything to do with healthy food. Um, I'll be the first to admit that I love French food, and there's a couple of channels that I watch that give instructional videos on how to make different recipes in French. And some of them are better for you than others if you can pick and choose. Obviously, learning to make things that are, like mother sauces, like bechamels and veloutés. Velouté is nothing more than a broth flavored bechamel. What do you make with a velouté? Well, if you garnish the top of it with mushrooms and you blended mushrooms into essentially what amounts to a cream, milk, butter, and small amount of flour roux that you use for thickening, you have French onion soup. And it beats the living daylights out of Campbell's. So is that an improvement on Campbell's? You bet your butt it's an improvement on Campbell's soup, which will not tell you now whether they're putting GMO ingredients in their canned soups. Um, if you don't put all the milk in it, you wind up with a sauce that you can put on chicken, casseroles, things like that. Uh, I like to use it for, uh, we make pork schnitzel. We usually either make cheesy potatoes for that or a cheese sauce for that, or we have it with a mushroom sauce. The mushroom sauce also works on Emeril Lagasse's Salisbury steaks. So it learning a basic, learning some of the basics in French cooking because they're the basis for so much of the best food that you can make. Northern Italian being another of my favorites, as I mentioned. Um, you can make one thing go a lot, cover a lot of bases, and those have been invaluable to me to actually watch somebody put this sauce together, make that dish. Um, how do you butterfly a chicken so you can stuff it with mushrooms and bacon? Uh, that's once you learn the trick to it to make the pockets in the chicken, you've got chicken breasts that suddenly are no longer the most boring protein you can buy aside from tofu. Um, I even have a tofu recipe that makes tofu edible, although I'm not sure I'd recommend it to anybody as a common dish. Um,
Right.
but uh, but yeah, even my point is that even as unsung and unloved a protein as tofu can be turned into something that tastes like you would want to eat it. Um, those channels do a big great service, and if we're going to get people to put in the effort, we need to show them how what the basics are, what the simple things are that then translate into a whole bunch of different kinds of dishes. Um, it really comes down to are they focusing on the difficult portions of recipes because they're showing off their abilities, or are they more focused on I'm going to show you how to make a basic sauce and then I'm going to show you 5 different recipes you can make with it.
Yeah.
That the
So
latter
Sherry's
is
absolutely correct here. You guys will love Chris Cook in Nashville because he does both things. He will
right.
show you how versatile something is, as well as how to make something extremely complicated. Now, usually the reason why his food is extremely complicated is because he's making something out of stuff that it shouldn't become what he's making it into.
Right.
So because he's making carnivore crackers, he's making carnivore, mashed potatoes, um, and even on the flip side of that, kind of going back to what Nick was saying, is being obsessed with convenience. That's something that I am very obsessed with convenience because I don't have a lot of time.
Yep.
So how do I take my way of eating, which is is a keto with more carnivore leanings, right?
Yep.
How do I go and make that as simple and convenient for myself? So that's something that I've been working on for the last few years, is how do I streamline my own life?
Yes.
And, how do I do that in a manner that is easy? Well, I don't have to put a lot of thought into it. So, I mean, it comes down to, frozen burger patties. I make fried chicken thighs. I make, and then there's an argument on what they should be called. I mean, I know it's a little minutia, but whether it's butter Bob's chicken or if it's, heart attack chicken, but I just take, I have a pan and I have it full of, well, it kind of it becomes less and less lard as time goes on, but it starts off as lard and then becomes more chicken fat. But I take, the lard and I just put in a family pack of chicken thighs. I used to start them off with skin side down, but now I do skin side up and I let them cook for a while. And then and then I cover them with a screen just to keep the grease from popping all over my stove. And then I go and I flip them, and then I get them to where they're just basically almost like chicken wings. So the skin is good and crispy, and they're just phenomenal. And they're $1.77 a pound here. I don't know what they might be at where you live, but I mean, how do I do it with a budget mindset? Because $1.77 a pound for chicken thighs, they're basically better wings and more meat, juicy, crispy, all the things you want. And then, then I do burger patties, frozen burger patties. My wife, she's not so much on the burger patties. So like I will go to Costco and get now it's not exactly affordable, but if you buy like the whole New York strip roast, they charge you $9.99 a pound versus $15 a pound if it's cut. So you just buy that. And I mean, it's $150, but you
Yep.
get 19 steaks out of it or whatever. You know what I mean? You're getting
Yep.
you're getting a good number of steaks out, and then I bag them up, freeze them, pull them out, make her some steaks, send her off to work with her with her steak lunch or whatever it is. But my growing goal is, how do I make this lifestyle easy, or so easy that I can't even mess it up? Because I
Right.
think that's where a lot of us come from, like especially if you're coming from the fast food convenience, everything comes from a box mentality. How do we, because this is a question I think that gets lost along the way. How do we entice people who are so set in the standard American diet? Everything comes from a box, everything comes from a drive through. How do we entice them to make meaningful changes without it being a complete upheaval in what they know?
That's
Because I
that's
mean,
the
it's $1 million
64
question, right?
that's a $64,000 question. Whatever the game show is, it really comes down to education, motivation, and opportunity. Um, there are only a certain number of ways of preserving food. We've been doing it for thousands of years, so we know what they are. Uh, One of the ways that I try to extend that is, there's a Chinese dish that I like, that's a spicy chicken dish with scallions and peanuts. And I can make that and put it in the fridge with my cut up chicken. The peanuts I just measure. The scallion is in the fridge and it stays whole until I'm ready to cut two stalks for the dish. And the sauce and the chicken remain separate. and that will last a week in the fridge. Um, we do curried chicken salad where we take the white meat, which is the uninteresting part, mix it with mayonnaise, sour cream, and a lot of turmeric based uh, powder, um, curry powder, and have that on bread. Have that on slices, rounds of bread with the charcuterie. So you keep it in the fridge as quote unquote leftover ingredients. And then you can have leftovers left in the fridge like everybody knows if they've grown up around a good home cook that that stew is better the second day. So you
Chili
make
too.
chili is as well. So you make a stew or a chili and you portion it out in the fridge. Makes it easier to one, it makes it easier to pack into the fridge, and two, it means you pull out one freezer container of the stuff and it makes a meal. Do it that way, and you get a week of meals. Um, interspersed with some hamburgers or some stuffed chicken breasts in there, and you've got a week's worth of meals, and you need 3 days worth of chili or stew. So it as long as it has a long shelf life, it's there for you to use when you want, and it allows you the variety without having to make everything every time. Because, like I said, with my knife skills, prep is a very time-consuming process. So if I can go through an entire head of cabbage and shred it, if I can cut up an entire bunch of carrots and a full head of celery, I want to do that. And I want to store it in the fridge. How do you best store that in the fridge? One way to do it is you put it cold water in the fridge and leave it in there. And you keep it moist, and it will keep for a solid week as components in the fridge. If you need to remove the water from it in order to stir fry it, sprinkle it with salt for 20 minutes. Sucks all the moisture out of it. Which is a trick I learned from dry fried beef in Chinese cooking. That's the sauce has to stick to the ingredients, so the ingredients have to be dried. Like when you're sautéing a scallop, you dry it off with paper towels. You could do the same thing with certain vegetables. You store them in water and restore them with salt in order to get rid of the water. And the other one I'm a big fan of is dried mushrooms. One, you get a lot more variety in what types of mushrooms you can buy because you can go out and find shiitakes just as easily as you can white button mushrooms, as long as you're willing to go with the shiitakes dried. You, when you reconstitute them, put the water in the sauce of the dish. Instant mushroom flavoring for the sauce or the
Yeah.
gravy. And they reconstitute beautifully, and you make use of the water that you soak them in. So there are a lot of different shortcuts like that. That's the kind of thing I would love to see a channel showing. How do I make a week out of, like you said, a New York strip, a whole New York strip roast? How do I make a week's worth of food out of that? um, what tricks, tools, and techniques would help me do that?
Well, here's a question for you. What channel do you have your recipes on, Mr. Red Shirt? So because that goes a long way. If you have the skills, if you have, I mean, obviously in this instance, there's a desire. You have to have a desire to want to make content. But if you just set up a camera and show what you're already doing, then you may be able to put that content that you're so looking for on YouTube yourself.
Right. Yeah, I should probably do that. Um, I mean, I know I could do that. It's a
Yeah.
case of it's a case of boomer technology fright. Um,
Oh, it's so easy now, though.
uh,
I mean, it's so easy now to like, so, I mean, most people have a really nice camera in their hands every day. whether you have an iPhone or an Android or whatever,
Right.
you have a really solid camera. I mean, not and I because I say this because one of the things that I like about there's a channel that I watch, and his name is Marquez Brownlee, and it's MKBHD. It's a tech channel, but he also has another channel for what he really likes. He has an auto channel called Autofocus, and that's all about cars. Now
Mm-hmm.
he's such a big channel with his MKBHD channel that he can, companies loan him cars for weeks at a time so he can review them.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets to do a side channel doing what he absolutely loves, and he does it all with a phone.
Mm-hmm.
He records all well. Now with his main channel, he's recording with Red cameras. They're 8 and 12K. They've got all these like super ridiculous technologies that go into making those videos. But his autofocus channel is all done with his iPhone or Android phone or whatever he's using. And that was the reason why even like I went and picked up these little microphones because so many of his videos he was using these little microphones to record attached to his phone. So that's I went and these are like $100 for, you know what I mean. So like it doesn't take a lot these days to make great content, and there's so many editing tools out there. I mean, there's tools you can edit right in your phone. You can record the footage with your phone. You can get I started off with a program called Vlog Now, just VN Vlog Now, and you just cut, edit. Doesn't have to be special. Doesn't have to be anything, and you just put it up. And if it's compelling, people will watch. And and I'm not trying to necessarily sell you on that, but I would just try to say, like, for not just you, but for people who watch this, if there's something that you want to see that's not being showcased, and you have the skills or even the desire, it's something that can be done. And it's also kind of like it kind of also touches on what John says here. Is like, now he's talking about food as an addiction, which I understand firsthand. Because like when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, you will change. Now some people will. Some people will take their health into their own hands. But unfortunately, when it comes to health, we are so conditioned that we're conditioned that medicine is the only thing that can fix us, that a pill is the only thing that can fix us. We're so conditioned that the average person on the street, if you ask them how much does diet truly impact your health, most people are going to say minimal, especially if it's mental health, it's even less. And we know that that's truly just not the case. But I just kind of say, like, at least when it comes to making content, you can make a difference. And hopefully the more people who are out there making content and and putting the all this information out there helps people. And I know your channel would be more in the lines of proper knife techniques, so you're not cutting your fingers off, and things like that. I think that would be phenomenal, especially if you're talking about getting into the sauces and how to make a sauce that can cover 5 different dishes, versus someone like me who's like, I put the frozen patty in the cast iron pan and then I eat it. Like, you know what I mean? So I just think like it's so very important that we're all kind of putting us out there. And I think that's one thing that we think, you know, we worry about all the stuff coming and people losing jobs and things that might be coming. And but I think if we can put ourselves out there and just truly put what our passions are out there, I think that'll go a long way. But I don't know, maybe I'm kind of jumping the shark and kind of rambling and jumping all over the place. But yeah. Because Sherry says, I would support Red Shirt. I would support you, Red Shirt. You sound like you have an amazing recipes. And the fact is, you don't even have to be on camera. You have a voice, Red Shirt. And I'm sure you've been told this before. Maybe, I'd hope, but you have a voice that draws people in. At least for me, it's comforting to listen to. And like, I think I would tune in just to hear you talk about this stuff. So I don't know. That's just where I'm at. Did we lose your red shirt?
Nope, needed a break. I'm back.
Okay. All right. But yeah, somebody was asking, Sherry was asking here. I'm a minimal bread eater. Sometimes words are hard. Minimal bread eater. What kind of bread do you eat, Mr. Red Shirt?
Uh, what I tend to eat tends to be the highest quality bread that I can find, and uh, which comes down to fermented sourdough. Like sourdough bread, I'll make that. I'll eat that. I've got recipes for that. That's going to be my big challenge. That's my graduate project, my thesis, because bread making scares chefs. I don't know if you've ever read Anthony Bourdain, but he hung on to a bread maker, a baker, for his restaurant. That the guy was absolutely off the wall, unreliable, couldn't be bothered to show up at the restaurant until he had a batch ready. Drove Anthony absolutely up the walls, but his bread was just heavenly. And so a chef would put up with an awful lot for a bread maker who can produce the bread for the restaurant. Um, so the sourdough is a great one because you can make it as a sandwich bread with a boulet, which is very simple to make as far as they go. The biggest problem is getting your starter, which is a magical thing. It's very much alive, um, and it produces dough balls, which when you drop them on a cookie sheet and cook them, you wind up with that domed loaf. If you've seen that coming out of a bakery. It makes wonderful sandwiches. It makes wonderful bread for soups. French onion soup is perfect with a crouton of sourdough bread underneath all the Gruyere cheese. The other one I eat is courtesy of my German grandmother, who, as a kid, refused to have Wonder Bread, famously refused to have Wonder Bread in the house. So she would buy what's known as Westphalian brown bread or Westphalian rye bread. And you can buy that from Amazon. You can find it in specialty German delis. It comes in little packages of about 6 slices out of a rectangular loaf per package. Uh, and the stuff is absolutely phenomenal as far as making a lunch or a light snack or spreading a cheese on. Um, I used to make peanut butter sandwiches with homemade strawberry preserves, which had more sugar in them than most local markets have, because it had to balance out the pectin to thicken it. Um, but it was really very good, very sweet. And as a kid, I'm getting a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I'm happy. So those are my two go-tos. Another one that I like a lot um, is the Italian bread with all the holes, the air holes in it. And the name essentially of focaccia is another good bread. So if there were any breads to learn to make, because there are specialty flours sold in Europe that are high quality, um, that are used for making that sort of bread. Those would be the three that I would pick to make, learn to make, and the three that I consume the most frequently. They just tend to be expensive. None of them are cheap. They're all made. They all have to be made in the supermarket's bakery at the minimum. And as a result, one, because they have no preservatives in them at all, they're moldy inside of a week. Baguettes are wonderful, but they last about 4 days before they get so crispy that you might as well turn them into croutons or breadcrumbs. So being able to make it myself on demand sounds like a way of saving money. And those are absolutely my go-to types of bread. We had I went to Spain as a kid, a young teenager, and they had a breakfast roll called a bolillo, which I've since found translates to little boulet. I had to break one open on the corner of the table once when no one was looking because the crust is so thick. So if you like crusty French bread, the boulet and the baguette are absolutely de rigueur, absolutely phenomenal breads. Uh, but fermentation on the bread appears to be, from what I've read, healthier. So sourdough is probably one of the better ones to eat if you're going to eat bread. You're not going to cut that out of your diet. So, but those are the ones that I tend to go for, and I do want to learn to make. I want to learn to bake them along with pizzas and calzones, which, as I said, I have the wheat for.
Now
Uh,
Sherry's asking, she's asking for your sourdough recipe, and she's also asking what flour do you use.
um, I tend to use what the Italians call tipo 00, which is essentially an all-purpose flour. It's a white flour. I also use durum wheat, semolina, which is specifically very high stretch, very high protein content wheat for making calzones and chewy pizza crusts. And those are really the two go-tos that I wind up with. Bob's Red Mill is a flour mill in the United States that produces essentially the same sorts of things at very high quality with very little, no additives. Uh, they have reasonable protein content in their wheat, so we are talking about human wheat, flour for human consumption, not animals. They're cheap. They're a cheaper alternative to imported French and Italian wheats. So I definitely recommend checking out Bob's Red Mill. Um, but I use whatever high quality. I use whatever wheat the recipe calls for, but then I want to try and find the best one that I can in terms of quality. Um, and that usually comes down either to Italian or a Bob's Red Mill. uh, in order to have the quality there that produces what I want. I've been having lots of chats with Amazon's AI about flour and dumplings. Well, you need a regular bread. You just need a regular all-purpose flour for dumpling wrappers, because if you use the really fancy durum wheats, you wind up with too chewy a wrapper. So the characteristics of the flour turn into the characteristics of the bread, which is as it should be. It should reflect its ingredients, unlike something like Wonder Bread, where you wondered what they made it out of. Um, that's why they called it Wonder Bread.
Actually, I got to go to their facility when I was a kid, the Wonder Bread facility. That was like it was a field trip. We went in and it was in the late '80s, and one of the good. I remember one of the most amazing things that happened that day. We were walking through the factory floor or whatever, and this lady comes around and she's got a tote, like a big tote. She's holding it, and it's full of. It was like Wonder Bread and Hostess all together. So it was the little chocolate donuts. She had a tub full of them, and she walks up to like some third graders, and we like pounce on this poor lady. And
Yep.
we're just going ham on this thing. And the teacher's like, whoa, all right, like had to help her out. And like, I don't remember that to the day I die. You know what I mean? Just like,
Yep.
that was amazing. Like, but
Yep.
yeah, I mean, not a lot of people who watch my channel are too interested in bread. Sherry is a person that is here, and she isn't so much keto carnivore as she is. She's more on the vegetarian side of things.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, I try to make a space that's good for everybody. Because how do we make everybody healthy if we can talk with everybody about it? So, um, I just yeah. Um, Yeah, I
Well,
think. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead,
no,
Redshirt.
that's okay. No, let me get one lesson that Sherry will appreciate. Uh, One of the things my grandmother taught me about bread was that bread is not just a handle for holding on to food. It should be a part of the meal in and of itself. Now, to the extent that you want to use it, you can. You can put more or less bread into your diet. Obviously, somebody going for carnivore is going to have none or essentially none. Um, but the point of bread was, from her point of view, was that it should be every bit as good an ingredient as anything else you included on the plate. Um, so that's kind of where I try the space I try to stay in. That's the mentality. That's the idea that I try to keep in mind when I'm looking at breads, when I'm looking to make bread, or I'm looking to buy bread. Um, it tends to be smaller amounts. I tend not to eat sandwiches as much anymore. Um, but I will have, a roll up of roast beef around mayonnaise and some homemade mayonnaise and some vegetables and onions and cheese. Um, if it's gonna have bread, if I'm gonna have bread, it's usually in the context of a charcuterie. Um, so I've got something to pile things on and eat. Um, it just comes down to the extent that you want to include it in your diet. The better the bread you use, the better off your digestive system's going to be, the better off your metabolism's going to be. You're going to be healthier. And I think somebody was saying, are you better off eating eggs from the supermarket than not eating eggs at all if you can't get farm fresh eggs? Which, by the way, I we used to have. We had our own chickens. We still have the coop for them. Um, I may wind up having to become a chicken farmer myself one of these days because Mrs. Redshirt seems to have lost interest in the idea. Um, Basically, are there, is that the best egg you can get? As far as I'm concerned, it is. Are supermarket eggs an alternative that's still healthy? Yes, they are. You're still ahead of the game if you're eating eggs from the supermarket and you're not getting locally raised, locally laid eggs from some neighbor down the street who happens to keep a few chickens in a chicken coop, and they've always got an extra dozen lying around that they don't have anything to use them in. It's amazing how quickly you wind up with too many eggs when you have 6 to 12 laying chickens at the same time. Uh, so it's a matter of better. There's an old saying, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." That's my philosophy when it comes to the diet. It's my philosophy when it comes to health. Um, yes, you can live in absolutely perfect health, but if what you have to do to reach that is unbearable, it just means it feels like your life you're living a lot longer than you actually are because it's just a chore. And I don't want food to be a chore. I don't understand the people who say, the liberating thing about my carnivore diet is that food is just fuel now. Like, no, no. That's not where I want to go. Um, I want food to be a social occasion. I want it to be a reason for all of us in the household to get together and sit down and have a meal that somebody's made, or to have family come over and in true, uh, you know, been watching Landman, a true Mexican fashion. If you come over and you stay more than 5 minutes, you're going to be fed.
Right. And I
you
want to
know,
touch on that idea. I want to touch on that idea that perfection is the, is the enemy of good, right? I mean, like, that's the thing that I try to fight, because the idea that carnivore's the only way, keto's the only way, those are the only ways you're going to be healthy. And I think that makes making or helping millions of people get healthier impossible. Again,
Yes.
to touch on that is, how do we get 200 million people who are living with the idea that convenience is I mean, we're dealing with, most families are two people having jobs where they're gone 9, 10 plus hours a day, latchkey kids, whatever. Then on, you're dealing with parents who are not only working these ridiculously long jobs, but they've got kids in sports. They've got all these things. So the time it takes to put food on the table is time they don't have.
Yep.
So how do we get and I know, but people harp on convenience because it's a necessity. It's a necessity to survive. We're living in a society right now where the average rent for this country is $2,000 a month. That's insanity.
Yes.
I mean, like we're seeing car payments that are, going up to 8 and 9 years. We're going to see car payments that are going to outlast the average car life. And I mean, we're looking at these things. How do we transition the most people into a healthier lifestyle without it becoming something that they can't sustain? Because sure, you can have people try and make home cooked meals every night. You can have people try and fit all these things you want them to do to make them healthier, to fit it into their lifestyle. But it's not going to be sustainable because they have to make money. They have to pay bills. They've got to have their kids are doing whatever. Not everybody has kids and all, but we're talking about, like, how do we look at the most prevalent issues and how do we get the most people on the right track? And I mean, we have to meet them where they are. That's where, to me, if we can get people into single ingredient whole foods, but how do we get the majority of people even to consider that? We have to find a way to make single ingredient whole foods. We have to make that convenient. And we look at things like right now, there's a video that I made last week about a lawsuit on Costco chickens. Costco sells their rotisserie chickens for $5. Now, the conditions maybe that those chickens are raised in, some of the, the stuff that those chickens may be injected with, or whatever they're cooked with, all the things that go into getting that chicken from an egg to sitting in that bag under the heat lamp at Costco for $4.99 are maybe not the most ethical. They're maybe not the most, they're not the most, you know, however you want to look at it, they're not what we would want out of them. But for $4.99, and you in and out, pick it up, walking, and you've got, for an average family, that's a meal for the night for
Yep.
$5. But if you go and you pick up two, because they sell their chickens in packs of two for $20.
Right.
So you're saving time, money. But I mean, are we I think we lose sight of the fact that, how do we get people who are so ingrained with convenience? How do we get them to eat better? We have to provide them something equally as healthy, or healthier, that's equally as convenient.
Yes. And that's
And
difficult to do. No,
it
that
is.
is just flat out difficult to do because convenience has been prepackaged, made instant. I can I'm still learning to make rice on the stove just to have with my Chinese food. Um, Minute rice is a lot simpler. Uncle Ben's converted rice is a lot simpler. Neither of them is particularly good because they're both such polished rice grains that basically you're getting 100% starch and whatever minor nutrition is in the kernel. The bran is gone. So, you know, how do I get rice? I asked Mrs. Redshirt to make it. That's really
Right.
my solution. That's my quick and easy one. If you make the rice, I'll make the dish. We'll have dinner. Um, That sort of thing is difficult to beat because you're asking people to trade one thing for another. Trade the convenience for being healthy.
And more expensive.
Well, that yes, but in some cases it is, in some cases it's not. Um, if you make your own, it really comes back down to it's a matter of the time you can spend to prep, to cut,
Right.
to do that stuff. I mean, I have a stand mixer that has both a meat grinder attachment and the pasta roller attachment on it. Um, I have a mortar and pestle. My favorite description of using a mortar and pestle is from one recipe that I just recently decided to try and make, and it said, how will you know when you've ground your spices enough in the mortar and pestle? When your right arm falls off, switch to your left arm and spend 5 more minutes, and then you're done.
Right.
That's essentially the instructions. Um, we are going to have to get people to want to change. They got to want to change. That's where, showing people how simple it can be, how easy it is to make a meal plan for a week and have all of it in your fridge, half of it prepped so that it's literally bring it out, put it into a cast iron pan and sear it off and you've got your hamburger done, or you have a roast, because now while the roast is in the oven with a meat thermometer in it, we're waiting for it to go ding, you can do other things. Um, it's there's no beating convenience. And the only way I can see is educating people into wanting to do things differently and make doing things different fun, make it social, you know, get more than one cook. I know more than one cook in the kitchen is a metaphor for total chaos, but you can get somebody on a cutting board while somebody else is making the meal, and that always works. I mean, restaurants divvy up the work that way. You have prep cooks and you have line cooks. And so if you're making a meal and you get somebody to help you do prep, you're halfway there already, because you're prepping stuff on the stove or the getting ready to go in the oven, and they're finishing up the prep of vegetables and whatnot. It's going to take education. And like I said, I've posed this question to various Twitter accounts that are whole food, healthy food accounts talking about it, the history of food. Um, it's tough to it's tough to do. And I didn't pose it as a question with an answer. I posed it as a question to be brainstormed. Unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of activity on those questions, those posts. So I don't know what the story is or what the answer is. I can't give you a pat answer. I wish I could. I will say that the Mediterranean diet is a weird diet, um, in that as you mentioned about something else, is poverty food. A lot of it is. Um, Take a look at the countries that were omitted from the Mediterranean diet: Spain, France, um, parts of Italy. What do Southern Italians eat? Southern Italians famously eat pasta. Uh, well, you need to learn to make it in order to have either that or you have to pay $3 to $5 a pound for your pasta, at which point you're not saving any money, because that and a homemade tomato sauce costs as much as a hamburger, more than a hamburger. But if you can get yourself to make your own sheet pasta, uh, you can make lasagnas that are to die for, that are fantastic. Uh, Canned tomatoes work just as well as fresh tomatoes to make sauce. Put canned tomato sauce together with pasta, you've got a meal. Um, Put it together with a chicken breast that's been coated in almond flour, pounded flat, coated with almond flour, and cooked in high temperature, cooking oil, either lard or clarified butter. and put sauce on top of that and some mozzarella cheese, and you've got chicken parmesan that, quite frankly, would fly in any restaurant if they were willing to pay for the ingredients and do the prep that way, as opposed to buying a frozen chicken patty from Tyson and slathering that in a jarred sauce, jarred tomato sauce. So, you know, is there an easy answer? No. You need to change people's habits. We're going to get them to eat more healthy food, because healthy food starts out as cows and pigs and chickens and whole stalks of celery and potatoes that are unpeeled. And, you know, none of that immediately comes to mind as a meal I want to eat. Um, so there's got to be some re-education. There's got to be, make it as simple as possible, so that the convenience, you change where the convenience comes in. Um, you extend the amount of time that your ingredients last, and you reuse that lard, you reuse that tallow, and that container of it lasts you for months.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I said. Like I continue you reuse my lard and like wow, it's like less and less lard as it goes on, becomes more and more chicken fat.
yeah,
But I keep reusing it until it's done. But I think that's a huge lesson to think about. Like how do we move forward? How do we make things last? How do we get to, in a mindset of leftovers and all that? I think our my kids who live in my house could really utilize some of that. They have bags and bags of leftovers in the fridge, but they continue to cook new things every night because, well, I don't want that now.
right.
But and that's a conversation for another day. But I want to go ahead and say thank you so much, Red Shirt. I've truly enjoyed this talk. I think it's your journey is invaluable to talk about, because I mean it is a very extraordinary journey, and especially it's just over the last couple of months, but seeing how that's changed and how that's, kind of that forced perspective shift where you're now looking at things in a drastically different manner. I mean, even over the course of the last year, few years with, when you found Gary Taubes and then how you've incorporated that into what you're doing now, I think is fascinating. And while you may not be doing exactly carnivore, you may not do exactly keto, you're doing something to better yourself. And I think that's definitely something that anyone can really take a lesson from and find, and can find, meaning and, and importance from. And I hopefully people will take that away and put that to their own lives and make it make things fit themselves, because I think that's inherently one of the most important pieces, you know. Um,
Yep.
and But I just want to say thank you, and I'm glad that that you were able to come on here with me. Like I've missed hearing your voice, and I don't know if you heard me say earlier, but I was just saying like that you have that amazing voice, and like all those times being on Toxic Tuesday with you have been a great joy to me, and getting to know you and very important to me, and I'm really glad. And thank you so much, and thank everybody for being in the chat and talking and taking the time out of your day to listen to us today and asking questions and being involved. And thanks again to Nick for the super chat. I truly appreciate that. Anything you want to promote, anything you want to say before we head out, Mr. Redshirt?
The one thing I will, especially in honor of our friend Nick Weiser, is that on Tuesday nights at 8:35, I'm on Toxic Tuesday with Nick, and you've been there. We have other folks that are regulars. That 70s rock fan is a regular. Mark D with a C is the master producer of the show, produces all the slides and clips. Um, it's a show that's a bit of it's a show with a difference. We look at movies from an entirely different point of view than most reviewers look at movies. We look at movies from how toxic are they? And to me, the measure of toxicity of a movie is, could it be made today? could it be shown today? And the less likely it is that a movie could be made or shown in today's environment, the more likely it is to have a very high toxicity rating. And we do an awful lot of action films, uh, buddy cop films, comedies that are just fun shows, fun movies to watch as your homework before the show starts. If you want to watch it so that you can follow along in the slideshow. Um, those are always an absolute blast. There's a bunch of people that like to be on there. I get on there that absolutely buy into the whole concept of it's if the movie's toxic, the show should be toxic. So let's get out there and offend somebody tonight, because if we don't, we're not doing it right.
That's
And
right.
and it is a whole lot of fun. I've watched it. I've been on it. Um, so that's my plug for next week and going forward. Toxic Tuesdays, 8:35 p.m. Central Time. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on here and talk about this. And I wanted to give my thanks to the chat for their fantastic questions. Um, to give us something more to say and for me to address for people. The questions tell you what people are looking to find out, what they don't know, what they'd like your input on. And that's of great value. That level of communication is something that's unique to uh, live streams. There's no feedback like that from a television cooking show. No matter who it is that's doing the show, whether it's an old episode of or just yeah, I can go watch one of Gordon Ramsay's cooking videos, but I can't call him up and go, "Can I substitute smoked salmon for the sea urchin in this? Would that work?"
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. Master class is as close as you'll get to it. We do belong to that. We've taken master classes. Um, both Mrs. Redshirt and I, mostly involved with cooking. And I've learned a great deal from them about the basics of knife work, prep work, combining and developing flavors. Uh, that's all invaluable, but it doesn't give you the feedback that tells you what people are trying to do, where they're having trouble, where they get stuck. Is there an ingredient they can substitute that will work for them that is more readily available where they live? And you know, I that to me is the key to these types of discussions, is that when the audience in the chat actually jumps in and starts throwing out questions and throwing out ideas that you know that's essentially going to turn it into a two-way conversation, and that's invaluable. So keep up the good work here. uh Chat, you guys are fantastic. You've made me feel very welcome here, coming in and joining Dustin for this show. So just thanks to everybody. I hope to see you again.
Me too. And I just want to address real quick Maritza's question: how do you store your bacon fat? I get mold in mine in less than a week. I have two countertop storage that I keep them in, and I strain out the bacon grease to make sure there's no bacon pieces in there. That goes a long way. And typically, hopefully you're gonna have no water in it. It's gonna be just fat, and then usually you're good to go. And it usually lasts for, I don't know. I've never had any mold before, so I don't know. I don't know. But she lives in Las Vegas, so it's dry there. So you would think that it would be less likely to mold than where I'm at, where it's not so dry. It's dry right now because we're in 16-degree weather, and it's going to be a low of -2. So that's fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, excuse me. But again, thank you so much, Red Shirt. I look forward to talking to you again. Look forward to seeing you again on Toxic Tuesday before long. And with that, I think, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and hit these credits, and we'll see you next time.
Bye
All right,
now.
everybody. Have a good one.